Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order this Planning Committee meeting of the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores and welcome everybody to the Council Chambers this evening. We're glad you're here. Second item on the agenda is additions, deletions, or amendments. We don't have any of those. Third item is disclosures of pecuniary interest and nature thereof. I'll ask any member if they have a pecuniary interest they'd like to declare. Seeing none, of course, you can do so anytime if you need to. Fourth item is adoption of minutes. And we have the minutes of the May 21st, 2019 meeting, and I have a motion moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Rich, that the Planning Committee minutes dated May 21, 2019 are hereby approved as circulated. Are any questions or comments to those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. And that moves us then on to our public meetings, and we have two public meetings on the agenda this evening, and I'll just run down how those will work so that everyone's clear before we get started. So I'll begin the public meetings by asking our planner to give a report, and once her reports are completed, I will ask the applicants if they have any comments they'd like to make, after which I'll ask members of the public if any members of the public have any comments they would like to make to the application. Once we've heard from all the interested members of the public, I'll ask members of council if they have any questions for clarification on the report. And then once that's complete, that will be the end of the public meeting. I'll encourage everybody here right off the top, if you do have an interest in any of the applications before us, make sure to sign the registry, which should be outside the doors there, and that will ensure that you get updates going forward as these applications make their way through the process. So that takes us then on to our first public meeting, item 5.1, which is on the Southampton Golf and Country Club, 400 North Rankin Street. And I'll turn it over to Tessa, our planner, for the report. Tessa.
Thank you. So the property is up on the screen there, so you can see it's a triangular piece close to the intersection of Highway 21 and Division Street. And so this is a property that is proposed for redevelopment. The proposed development would consist of 35 townhomes, and it would involve 2 new streets as well as municipal water and sewer and a few 3 blocks of open space. So you can see the lot is currently treed, and it is largely zoned planned development with a little bit right down at the bottom of the lot, the southern end of the lot, designated as environmental protection, so subject to some environmental hazards. So in terms of the official plan designation, so up on the screen you can see that the majority of the lot is designated as residential. That's the yellow. Some of it is designated as highway commercial, which is the pink. The green represents the environmental hazard areas, and then the light green is parks and open space. So the proposal is to redesignate these kind of light green and pink lands to residential, and then just slightly modify the dark green lands to reflect the updated engineered site plan. And then the entirety of the lot is proposed to be rezoned as well to reflect this. So here you can see the proposed official plan schedule, so all yellow residential with a little bit of green environmental hazard. So you can see the lots as proposed here, and these are all townhome lots. So these lots have been developed in conjunction with the architect and the developer as where the proposed townhomes will go. And there are 3 blocks of open space. So one at the southern end, one in the kind of most eastern corner, and one just adjacent to that, as well as new municipal roadways. You can see the proposed zoning there. So R3 and then the OS open space are those proposed for to be conveyed to the town as parks and open space. So the proposed, it's just the engineered site plan, so you can see the extent of the hazard, as well as the proposed lot fabric. And then they have also proposed a constraints plan. So all of these hashed purple areas are proposed for tree protection currently. So as it is a treed area, so all of the purple is proposed to remain treed. You can also see there is a small easement that is being proposed, so that's this little 3-meter wide easement here, and that's for golf cart access to the to the golf course, which is up here. It's my understanding that there are golf carts currently stored at this property, and this is how they access the course. So just in terms of the policies, just to give a really brief overview, because this is just for information. In terms of the provincial interests, our preliminary review of the application has found that the proposal generally satisfies the policies as laid out in the PPS. So these are listed kind of in full in the report, but just to kind of summarize, this is a property that's within the settlement area, and it represents a compact development and an efficient use of existing infrastructure, and it provides a new form of housing. Will increase the variety of housing types available in Southampton. There is also sufficient capacity from services to service the development. There is adequate access from Division Street and to this lot, which is a collector road. And there are no natural hazard features which will be impacted by the proposed development, and no negative impacts to the natural heritage features on the subject lands. And as well as cultural heritage, which has been reviewed, and there were no archaeological artifacts found on the property. In terms of the county official plan, the county plan provides policies for the consideration of draft plans of subdivision, and county council shall only approve plans which are subject to a number of conditions. So I've provided the list in the report, but I won't go through it all right now. In my subsequent report to committee, when a recommendation is made, I'll provide a full review of these criteria. But it generally states that, new subdivisions should be adequately serviced. They shouldn't pose any restrictions on adjacent lands. The dimensions and shapes of the proposed lot should be adequate. If it's developed on full services, the density should be no less than 15 dwelling units per gross developable hectare. And 30% of the proposed dwelling units should be achieved through medium density. Now, in this case, the density is about 18 units per hectare, so we're above the minimum, and 100% of the development is medium density. Under the Saugeen Shores official plan, townhomes are considered medium density, so the housing form means that it's considered medium density in this case. The county plan also provides direction that the county and local municipalities shall strive to ensure 30% of new residential development is affordable to meet the housing needs of incomes up to the 60th percentile. Now, information regarding the cost and affordability of these provided units hasn't been provided at this time, but the medium density nature of this development is likely to result in greater affordability. In terms of the local official plan, I'll just go through a few of the points. In terms of the parks and open space, so this kind of light green here, the applicant's planner and ourselves in the planning department are in agreement that this is likely a mapping error, that this line should really go along the extent of the road allowance. It doesn't really make sense that there's just this little strip of parks and open space in this development. It should be associated with the adjacent golf course lands. This is a separate parcel. So this would simply just kind of limit it to the edge of the road allowance here for the parks and open space. In terms of the highway commercial, the applicant's planner has provided a number of reasons why this kind of pink area should be redesignated from highway commercial to residential. These reasons include the fact that this area has no access directly to 21 and no visibility, meaning it has little value as a highway commercial lot. These lands are necessary for the functioning and viability of the entirety of the development, and the exclusion of these lands would result in a less functional road network. It would likely require a cul-de-sac and would reduce the number of lots by 9. The other note that much of these lands, as you see in the green, are proposed to be conveyed to the town as open space, or most of this is proposed to be conveyed to the town as open space, and it is subject to hazards. And they state that the use of these lands for residential use and conservation would be better for the overall compatibility with the lands already designated for residential use on the property. So those are the reasons provided for that conversion. In terms of the environmental hazard, the boundary is just proposed to be altered a little bit to reflect the site-specific mapping that has reviewed, that has in the engineering review, and the Conservation Authority, which has jurisdiction over hazard land, supports the proposed changes. In terms of the municipality's residential policies, the residential designation establishes the objectives of the town to provide a mix of housing forms and densities. A range of housing types as well as other uses are permitted in this designation, such as parks, home occupations, and neighborhood commercial uses. So there's no issue with the residential designation. As mentioned, for housing, the town also seeks a target of 30% of new housing to be provided in the form of medium and high density development. So this would help meet that medium density development target, as the proposed density is also 18.6 units per hectare, so above the minimum we seek. In terms of the significant woodland overlay, so you can see that as kind of this hashed area outlined in the green here. So this property is pretty much entirely subject to that woodlands overlay, and development is permitted within these woodlands as long as an environmental impact study has been prepared demonstrating that the development will not impact the features or functions of interior woodlands. So no interior woodland habitat was identified on this site, so so it won't impact any of those functions. The EIS environmental impact statement prepared by AWS Consulting stated that the constraints plan provided with the application meets the objectives of the environmental impact study that was done, and the woodland policies have been appropriately and adequately addressed. The town official plan also includes a number of policies for medium density development and subdivision approval. I've included these criteria in the planning report, but I won't go into them in detail tonight. But a full review of these will be provided in the subsequent report to committee. So I think I've pretty much gone over the zoning. So it's proposed to be rezoned from planned development to residential third density, which allows for the proposed townhomes, and then 3 blocks would be rezoned to open space and conveyed to the town. And then the EP lands would also be updated and conveyed to the town as well. In terms of the interdepartmental and agency comments, we haven't yet received comments from town staff, but they've told me that the detailed comments will come after this meeting. In terms of the other agencies, the SVCA found the application to be generally acceptable. They provided a list of conditions of draft approval. They noted a few issues with the stormwater management report, especially in regards to the maintenance of the infrastructure. And so the applicant's engineers are aware of this and are working with the SVCA to address those concerns. And they've also provided some additional information about the zoning and the hazards, which will be integrated into the final plan. Union Gas provided conditions for gas service, but there are no issues raised from any of the circulated agencies. We haven't received any public comments at this time in regards to this application, but any ones we receive tonight will be integrated into the future report. So in summary, this was just to give an overview of the application, and we will return at a later date with a recommendation.
Thank you, Tess. I'll ask the applicant if they have any comments at this time.
Yes, good evening. I'm here tonight. My name is Ron Davidson. I'm here tonight representing Southampton Golf and Country Club. This is not the Southampton Golf and Country Club lands. It's just the name of the ownership. The gentleman behind me here, Kevin O'Brien, is in fact the Southampton Golf and Country Club. He purchased the property a couple years ago. You'll see more from him in the future in terms of development applications. This is the first one Kevin has presented here. Anyway, I shall keep this brief. There's a significant amount of background work that's gone into this development, just like any plan of subdivision application, including archaeological study, an environmental impact study, and all the various engineering studies as well, including a preliminary stormwater management plan. The engineer herself is here tonight, and it's Laura Swanson. Laura is one of the engineers with Darrell M. Robbins Consulting, Inc. If there are any questions in that regard, she'll be happy to answer them. As Tessa indicated, the townhouses have been prepared by an architect. So we took the architect's drawing and made them fit onto a plan of subdivision. That makes the lots 11 meters wide. That's a good, healthy-sized townhouse. You probably haven't seen them that wide before. So yes, it is a medium density development by definition in terms of their townhouses, but it's not really that high of a density. You could say it's sort of on the upper end of a low density development. As you heard Tessa say, the density is just over 18 units per gross hectare. What that allows for is a more efficient or a wider townhouse unit, which is nice, especially for seniors if the units are going to be 1 story in size. Lastly, the last thing I'll say is an environmental impact study was completed, and as Tessa indicated, the environmental impact study has requirements for tree preservation. And on that note, the author of the environmental impact study and Laura have been working together, and they've come up with a tree preservation plan. We call it a constraint site plan. It's part of the application. That will form part of the subdivision agreement. So the next step after getting draft approval will be the applicant working out an agreement with your staff and ultimately it being ratified by council. And one of the drawings included in that agreement will be, again, this very constraint site plan. So a lot of trees will be preserved. Usually it's in the neighborhood of about 30%. So that's a good thing. That's all I have for my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions, or are there comments, I should say, from members of the public? Any members of the public wish to speak to this application? Ask again, any member of the public wish to speak to the application? Yes, ma'am. You can come on up to the microphone and just state your name. Could you just hit the button there? There you go. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lene Catalan. I'm at 203 Division, so directly beside where this is all going to start. It's an exciting looking proposition. One of the concerns that we have had, those of us that live on this side of the road, is water runoff and drainage, and I'm wondering what the engineering plans are to address that, because it's managing the water between the forested land beside us and the golf course is an ongoing challenge. So how is that being addressed?
We can get the representative of the applicant, whoever you choose, to come up and address that question. Sure.
We are planning to provide stormwater management controls. Generally, you're required to control flows from the post-development level down to pre, and so that's what the plan is for this particular development.
Sure, thank you for that. Sure, Ron, of course, yeah.
Just so everybody understands, or perhaps you understand, you don't have to take Laura's word for it, though. And I don't want to say that stormwater gets studied to death, but it's looked at with a very fine-tooth comb. The town's engineer has to be satisfied before final approval. The Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority has to be satisfied by final approval, and the Ministry of the Environment has a role in this as well. So there's three levels of government or three governmental bodies that are looking at this, making sure that Laura has dotted her I's and crossed her T's, just so you know.
Okay. Are there further comments from members of the public with regard to this application? Yes, sir. Come on up and state your name, please. Thank you.
Just a question. The easement that is it was suggested to gain access to the subdivision presently just kind of goes behind like 7 properties here. How does that easement then kind of address, if it's access to the golf course, just 7 properties? Unless I assume then under that there's future developments in lot 9, 10, 11, and 12, which is going to be further development to gain access to this easement. The only reason I ask is because it's a significant, like it's woodland area being cut through to gain access, but it doesn't seem like it, it's just behind those properties. So I'm just wondering what, how can you justify cutting through there just for those 7 places, and why doesn't it just come in through the street? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure we can get the applicant to address that. For Brian.
I wanted to say, first, Ron advised me not to have an easement there because he thinks it would devalue the houses. But I insisted because we're renting a shop on Highway 10, and if we don't have that easement in there, then they have to drive on the highway. And it's just not a safe condition. And then that easement will create a situation for golfers who want to be able to drive their golf cart into their backyard. And we're going to provide a backyard access to the garage so that they can drive it and park it in the back, even if they're in the middle of the block, and be able to walk right through the garage to the front of the house. And that's why they're so wide. Okay. But it's to access the shop, which we're renting. And I think we have a 5-year lease on it. And my intention is to buy the shop if I can in the future. And then if I can't, then we'll let it go back to the owners. And then that'll just be access to the golf course for those exclusive homeowners. And the easement is in favor of the golf course.
All right, thanks for that clarification. Any further questions or comments from members of the public? I'll ask one more time. Is there any further questions or comments from members of the public? I don't see any, so I'll ask then members of the committee, any questions for clarification from committee members? Start with Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to start off just with a general question for Tessa. I'm wondering if it would be possible for all of our applications that have records on the county website, if there's some way that we could have active links provided in our reports that would obviously be open to the public too, that we could just click on something, because I find it very cumbersome to go back and forth and try to access. I'm sure, I know I've had comments from the public that it's confusing too. I wonder if we could just note that and think about trying to do that.
Yeah, I'll just say why we can't do it currently is because each of our applications doesn't have a unique URL. So when you access it on our website, you kind of get through a portal and it brings up all the documents, but we can't link you directly to that page. We can just link you to the general Saugeen Shores list of applications page. Each application doesn't have a unique URL that we can then link you to. But this is something we're looking at, and we're looking at our website and making changes, and that is a known issue, and we are moving to a new database in the next year or so, or less than that, hopefully, and that should change the public side as well. So as those changes with our database and IT happen, hopefully it'll become more accessible, but we're aware of those issues and are working with them to improve them as we can.
That's great. I do have a couple of more questions. Thanks. Perhaps Ms. Swanson could speak to this just in terms of the stormwater management. One of the things in the report is talking about how you are going to be or already have investigated low-impact design practices, best management practices, especially since you have those limitations in terms of the area, so you can't have a conventional stormwater management pond. But you talked about using grass swales, that kind of thing. I heard a report on CBC radio this morning. They were talking about New Orleans and some of the techniques that they're using. They were talking about having a park that actually is also a stormwater management area, and I wondered if that was something that you could consider, or is it possible?
That is sort of an option. I think for this particular case, the area to the south might kind of sort of be functioning as that, because it is sort of a low, wet area. So there is the potential for stormwater to be held in that particular area. There's other options too of using grass swales. The area that we were kind of envisioning, area here, that's an area where
Okay, so in the report where it's talking about then the best management practices such as a grass swale, is that something you're basically not going to be moving forward with?
Make sure to turn your mic on there so people at home can hear you.
Sorry about that. We are using a grass swales, and it could be that they might be used areas. There might be a grass swale along here in that rear yard, but
to complement the main.
Complement, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's something that might be looked at. Final grading.
Okay, thank you. I do have a couple more questions, if I may. And this question refers to, there are two questions from the EIS addendum report written by Mr. Morton, I believe. So one was talking about the relocation of a particular type of endangered plant called the burr-reed sedge. And I think in the report it talked about that relocation to non-developable land. Would that be in the EH area? Does somebody know that?
I believe it's in the OS area. I believe it was located down to the top corner. Yeah, so
Okay.
I believe it was located to back in this corner, which will be conveyed to the town.
Oh, okay. And so those are, it said there were 2 clumps of burr-reed sedge plants. Is that all the, was that covering, do you know, is that, that's it? Okay. My other question is about, just in general, the EIS addendum talked about the fact that, and Tessa mentioned, there's no interior woodland habitat. My parents lived on Tyendinaga from 1983 to 2016, and that there is a deer path that goes right through that section, and that's something that you have to watch. If you drive on that road, you've got to go slowly, have your lights on, because the deer go across there regularly. So I'm wondering how, I'm speculating that this will affect that deer path. Do you have any comment on that?
I mean, potentially. I mean, I'm not an expert, but generally interior woodland habitat has to do from the edge of it's the distance from the edge of the woodland, and it's usually about 150 meters or maybe more than that. So I don't think at any point in this we have that distance, because it's such a small site from an edge of the woodland. So typically, That's why there's no interior woodland habitat, because there's no distance far enough from any roadway or developed lot or anything like that. And that's typically, I think, how interior woodlands are defined. So because of that, it's not a big enough piece of woodland on its own without being already interrupted by a roadway to qualify as such. And then I know that the ministry has provisions for deer wintering areas, and those are protected, but just travel routes I don't think are necessarily protected, just those wintering areas. And the Ministry of the Environment provides mapping on where those are.
Thank you. Further questions for clarification from members of the committee? Councillor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, I think a lot of it got covered in what Councillor Grace talked about, but I too had a question with regards to the drainage. So on this property, we're used to seeing subdivisions and planned subdivisions draining to the west. Normally, probably 95% of the things we see drain to the lake. But correct me if I'm wrong, this one here drains back to the river. Is that right? The natural drainage goes back across Highway 21. Right? So is it not true that due to recent changes to the culverts under Highway 21, the situation with the drainage has actually been exasperated, and there's been unintended consequences of that drainage put in it? Oh, that's right, yeah. So you've got this ponding and pooling area that currently exists, wasn't there prior to the culverts that were put under the highway, and apparently not deep enough to maintain the proper drainage. So once again, the rule of unintended consequences come into play here, where they changes and on the way the highway goes, and now the water is pooling on the northwest side of the highway here, right? So under your plan, are you going to restore some of those natural features to drain back to the southeast under the highway, or are we going to rearrange it back into the municipal stormwater system, rectify itself?
There's only so much that we can do because we've got to match into existing structure, but the impact is sort of rerouting it.
Going towards the highway, we're avoiding residential neighbors. It's probably a preferable.
Yeah, so the existing storm sewer on Division Street is going to take whatever you need. So presumably then none of the proposed development are going to be have any basements. They're all going to be a slab.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Further questions or comments from members of the committee? The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a couple comments and a few questions, perhaps to Mr. O'Brien or Mr. Davidson. What is your target market in terms of these townhouses? Are we looking at, I mean, I think filling the void with...
Originally, I was when I bought the golf course, I was planning on doing a seniors type of retirement development. And even in the original concept form, the reason the lots are so wide is we were planning on doing mostly bungalows. But I think, with the resurgence of economic activity in the region, that we can sell to families over there as well. So I've added 2-story units in the middle. So it's going to be a mixed. Certainly, the bungalow units will be sold to retirees, almost certainly. And the way I'm going to do it is all the end units will be bungalows, but the middle units will be mostly 2 stories. Okay. And I imagine they'll go to families in general, but there will be some seniors that are willing to buy a 2-story unit, of course. And we're going to have a bungalow loft option as well. The units will be freehold as well, which will make them a little higher end. I do expect a lot sold on Eckford yesterday for $240,000, right? So the area is in demand. That lot was listed only for 2 days. So I expect my price point should be starting around 500.
Okay.
I do think that if I don't meet the 30% threshold, that I can talk about retaining a block or 2 for rental, and then maybe address affordability by providing some rental housing instead if I can't make the price point because we're too high.
Thank you for that. Tessa, on the mapping, if you could bring the map back up across the road, where you see to the west, directly across the road, what is that? What is the zoning on that property? Right, no, to the west, northwest. The other side, Mike. Right up top, right there. Not the green, but right there.
Well, it's designated for residential. It looks like it's also zoned for planned development.
Planned development.
Yeah.
So, and planned development across with the 40 units. I love the development. I think it's going to be a wonderful addition to our community. One of the, well, I have a few questions. The environmental hazard property, has there been discussion with the owners at all in terms of in what hands that will end up in which level of government? What are the plans for deeding of the environmental hazard lands? Is it the Conservancy, the Town of Saugeen Shores, the Conservation Authority? What are the plans for the age lands?
I believe it's intended to be conveyed to the town. So all 3 open space blocks as well as the EH block. So this would kind of be one unit down at the southern end. That would be a combination of open space and hazard.
Okay. And nowhere in the plan, and I get a little concerned, it's happened in the wonderful development at the Club of Westlink, where the provision for public green space, and I'm talking about moms, dads, grandparents, taking a walk out the front door, the back door, and walking through the neighborhood into a town park. And north of the Saugeen River, we have very little, if any, green space, quote, playgrounds for parents, children, grandparents to walk to. And it's a little concerning to me that there's no provisions in the plan for green space. I see the 3-4 pieces of, treed property and environmental hazard property. I get that. But has there been any discussion at all with the owners, with the developer, Mr. O'Brien, for green space, and whether it be trail systems or whether it be a park with benches and perhaps a swing or a teeter-totter for kids to go in and enjoy? I mean, parks provide for a sense of community. They provide for a public gathering place. They provide for a great place for neighbors to meet one another. I think that's something I don't see in the plan.
We wanted a park, and I instructed them to put a park in, and one of the open space blocks was originally designed as a park. But with all the tree retention area, we couldn't clear it. So it would have put us over the limit. So I took out 3 lots to make it not a cul-de-sac, so that it'd be a U-shape. We're certainly going to have a trail system in the future developments along the golf course. You can take that road right through to the golf course, so it will be a future access for bicycles onto the golf course. But I haven't finalized plans to develop on the golf course except for the 18th hole out of respect for the golf course and all the existing members. And so for me to put a trail in through there, it would have to go right along the side of the 8th hole, and it would create a serious hazard for people to be hit by golf balls. But I do plan on putting a trail system on the along the 18th hole, along the highway, all the way up to Fisherman's Park, and connecting the trails all the way around through Colpe's Bay, all the way in behind. And I bought the other property on the other side of the golf course, and the trail will be connected in a loop.
I think Jay Posner had a comment he wanted to make.
We haven't provided any formal comments on parks, so I was just going to caution I wouldn't recommend negotiating parkland commitment at this time. That's all.
Thank you for that.
Well, and I just did want to go on record,
Yep.
Mr. Mayor, that I think that the importance of green space is that it is very important. And in the last 2 or 3 developments, I'm seeing cash in lieu of parkland, and you'll never get the park, you'll never get the land back. And cash is one thing, but I think that having a public gathering place for people to walk to with their grandkids and mom and dad and children, there's not a nicer thing to do after dinner than to go to the park with your kids. And I think with that planned development directly across the road to the west, northwest, I mean, I'm getting my directions wrong, but there's a fair amount of housing going into that area, and so I would like that to be discussed at some point. Is any part of the EH property, for example, clearable for a small corner? So just if you look at the options, maybe it's not developable for parkland. The EH is EH for a reason. That could be taken into consideration. And I had a question about stormwater management. It's been answered. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Further questions or from members of the committee? I had a question, and it pertains back to that affordable housing component, and Mr. O'Brien addressed it a little bit there about how he might meet that 30% recommendation in the county official plan. And I would just say the what's written here, at least in the planner's report, leaves things a little bit nebulous on that point. I mean, whether or not it's achieved in this development or not, it's unclear. And what I would say is, before this comes back for approval, I would like to see it clear. You know, what it doesn't meet, is it going to hit 30% or not? I would like it to. It ought to hit the 30%. And so I would just like to know when it comes back. It doesn't have to be answered right now. But when it comes back, I'd like it to hit the 30%, and I'd like that to be clear. Is there anything else from, do you want to make a comment, Mr. O'Brien? I'm sure, like I say, we're not making a decision tonight, so you're going to have the opportunity to talk to our planner and work it through before it comes back to council. Is there anything further? If not, then that concludes this public meeting. Thank you all very much. As I said, anybody with an interest in this application, please make sure to sign the registry outside so that you're updated as the process proceeds. So that moves us then on to our second public meeting of the evening, which is item 5.2. And it's with regard to 123841 Ontario Incorporated, Cayley's Grain, and 4713 Bruce Road 3. And I'll turn it over to Tessa, our planner, for the report. Tessa.
Thank you. So this is a property just south of the hamlet of Burgoyne. So Burgoyne's right at the intersection here. So we're just a little bit south of that on the western side of the road. And so this is a surplus farm dwelling severance. So there's actually 2 original Crown lots in this parcel that have merged. So you can see one of those original Crown lots has already had a surplus farm dwelling removed, and so that's lot 31. And now they are proposing to sever the surplus farm dwelling at lot 30. So just, you can see the aerial there. So it's generally agricultural in the surrounding areas. It's serviced on private services and has access from the county road. So this is the proposed severance here. So you can see there's an existing dwelling, septic, drive-in shed, and garage, as well as the well, pump house, barn, and another shed. So the barn and shed are proposed to be removed as a condition of the consent in this case. The garage is proposed to be removed either entirely from the site or relocated. I'd have to double check, but it will be moved from its location here, and the entrance will remain, but the driveways will be reconfigured as a result of the removal of the barns. And then the drive-in shed is proposed to remain on the property. And so the rezoning is required to prohibit residential development on the retained farmland. And a holding provision has been included that would include all those lands with archaeological potential. So this is what we did with the properties just to the north when they were rezoned last year. So you can see that kind of white and green hashed area. Those were the areas that were identified as having archaeological potential. So we would just continue that zoning down through these lots where it applies. And this does not impact the agricultural operation. Agriculture isn't considered severe enough disturbance if it's cropping, so it wouldn't impact that. It doesn't limit the farmer's ability to continue using it for those uses. But if any development is proposed, any construction, anything like that, then they would be required to complete an assessment for those areas proposed for development. So just in terms of the policies, in terms of the provincial policies, there's only limited opportunities for lot creation in agricultural areas, and one of those is in this situation where it is a surplus farm dwelling severance. So the applicant is a bona fide farmer. They own a number of lands, including the lands directly to the north of this property, and they are proposed to merge under the same ownership. And so this can be considered one of the few opportunities for lot creation in an agricultural area. In terms of other provincial interests, such as environmental hazards, environmental and heritage and cultural heritage, no changes are proposed to the hazard lands. Those areas that are currently EP will remain EP. There were some natural heritage features identified on the property by the SPCA, but the impacts were deemed to be negligible as a result of this application, so no EIS was required. And the holding provision will protect any areas with archaeological potential for future development. In terms of the county official plan, this meets the provisions for a surplus farm dwelling severance, and as the Cayley's Grain meets the provisions of being a bona fide farmer under the Bruce County official plan, as they own and farm their lands and have a primary residence elsewhere, so the dwelling can be considered surplus to their needs. No changes are proposed to the official plan designations on the lands. In terms of the zoning bylaw, the retained farmland is proposed to be rezoned, as I mentioned, to prohibit residential development as per county and provincial policy. Those areas shall be zoned to A1, so this is just a special A1 provision for those ones, and then the A49H is those lands for archaeological holding. The Saugeen Shores bylaw requires us to provide some special provisions for the actual farm dwelling lot, as it requires a greater minimum frontage and area than provided here. So special provisions are proposed for this lot, which would have the minimum lot area be no less than 0.5 hectares, and state that the minimum frontage be no less than 72 meters. And it would also address the required setbacks. So in the agricultural zone, the minimum setback is 20 meters from all lot lines. So for the newly created lot lines, so basically impacting the drive-in shed and the pump house, we require special provisions. So that would set a minimum setback of 7 meters from the drive-in shed and a minimum setback of 2 meters from the pump house. In terms of the interdepartmental and agency consultation, so there are no objections or no comments from town staff. The municipality of Erin Eldersley let us know that they had no objections. Saugeen Valley confirmed that the EP zone coincides with the hazard mapping and did not recommend the preparation of an EIS, and noted that some areas of the property are within their regulated area, but no development is proposed within them. There were no public comments received at the time of this report, and we are prepared to make a recommendation on this file tonight, subject to any objection or comments made at this meeting, but at this time we are prepared to recommend adoption or approval of the application, and that the bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption.
Thank you, Tessa. Any comments from the applicant? Okay. Thank you. Any comments from any members of the public? I'll ask just one more time. Any comments from any members of the public? Okay. I'll ask any comments from any members of the committee. No. I just make one comment, and it's not to do with the specific application, but with the general principle of this, which I've commented on a number of times before. We must, in our official plan and zoning bylaw reviews, create the provisions that prevent people from having to do zoning bylaw amendments to achieve this. It costs a lot of money, and it's unnecessary. We should be able to have provisions in our zoning bylaw that make it so that you can sever a surplus farm dwelling, which people are perfectly allowed to do, and without having every time to change the zoning bylaw. So please, when we're doing this, let's fix that, and so that we don't have to put people through this anymore. That's my only comment, and if there's nothing further, then I'll just read the recommendation that the committee approves zoning bylaw amendment Z31 19.44 for the properties described as Lot 30 and Part Lot 31, range WSR, Town of Saugeen Shores, former Township of Saugeen, and the necessary bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. If there's nothing further, all in favor? That's carried. All right, so that then moves us on. Nothing further, so it takes us to adjournment, and I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Schreider. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.